Welcome back to everyone who was with us throughout the day, and welcome to all of our new visitors and guests who have just joined us. As you can see, we've transformed the room a bit, and we're about to talk a little bit about best global brands for Interbrand. I have the pleasure of introducing our two new guests, both from Interbrand, our Chief Creative Officer of North America, Chris Campbell, and our Chief Strategy Officer from North America, Stef Gans. Chris and Stef are here today to share the 2014 Best Global Brands list, as well as talk a bit about our theme this year, which is the Age of You. Many of you may know BGB, Best Global Brands, is the definitive list for the world's most valuable brands. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Chris and Stef.
So thank you. That's Chris. I'm Stef.
I'm Chris.
So I'm normally not very nervous when I talk to an audience. Don't know why that is, but that's just me. Unless there's somebody in the room that knows a lot more about the topic I'm about to talk about than I do, which is the case. So any questions about Best Global Brands, ask him, not me. So we're basically going to talk about Best Global Brands and the results of the study that we just published last week. But that's really only, let's say, 20% of the session. The rest of the session is about our view on what this means for brands, or what the future of brands are. And the theme of that is the Age of You. Okay? But first about the valuation of brands. If you add the value of these top 100 brands up, you get to a staggering 1.6 trillion. This is trillion, right? Yeah, $trillion. Which is just outrageously...
How big is it, Stef?
Well, Chris, that is so great that you asked that. Because that is actually more than the GDP of Spain. Not the biggest country in the world, not the biggest economy in the world, but a sizable economy for sure. So that is a staggering number. And now, just to talk a little bit about... I just want to talk a little bit about, let's say, the how of that study. So you can understand where those numbers are coming from that are going to roll over this page in a couple of slides. So first of all, let's address a couple of basics, right? So for a brand to be a candidate for the list, it has to meet a couple of criteria. The first criteria is that there must be sufficient publicly available data on the business and on the brand, right? Otherwise, we can't pass judgment. So there are some big companies in the world that are privately owned that are not on this list. The second criteria is that at least 30% of the revenues of the brand must come from outside the brand's home region. So Samsung is on the list because more than 30% of its business is outside of Korea. Chevrolet is on the list because more than 30% of its sales is outside of the US. The economic profit must be expected to be positive over the longer term. So this should be, at least at some level, a successful business, economically sustainable. And finally, the brand must have a public profile and awareness above and beyond its own marketplace. So this must be a well-known brand that is basically, that has a footprint bigger than just the potato chips or hamburgers it sells. Now just one slide only, I promise, about the methodology of our valuation. We basically take 3 different lenses that we apply to the available data, right? The first lens is all about the financial analysis, so the financial performance of that business. How is the business itself that carries that brand that we're looking at, how's that business doing? How big is it? How profitable is it? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Etc. Then we basically apply a filter, and we're saying, okay, so if the financial analysis leads to a value of, say, 100, what part of that is attributable?
That's the word.
Thank you. To the brand, right? And in some categories, that is a lot higher than in others. Say the role of brand for anything that Gucci sells is a lot bigger than for milk. If you're in the supermarket and you're buying milk and your typical brand is not there, the typical consumer will buy another pack of milk without really worrying about it. If you're in the market for a Gucci handbag and you can't find it, the store is closed or whatever, you're not going to go to the store next door and buy another handbag. You want that handbag from Gucci. Why? It's got the Gucci brand. So the role of brand in that particular market for the Gucci business is very high. The role of brand for milk is fairly low. So that says something about the value of the brand for that business. And then the third filter or lens that we apply, we call brand strength. And brand strength is actually a composite measure. Composite because it consists of 10 different measures, 4 internal, 6 external, let's say parameters that we check on how strong that brand is actually either managed internally. So are the people that are working on that brand very clear what the brand is about? Are the roles and responsibilities very clearly defined in the company? Is the brand well protected, for example? And externally, to what extent is the brand seen as authentic? Quite relevant for today. To what extent is the brand well known? How, let's say, geographically spread is the brand, etc., etc. So those 3, let's say, dimensions are taken into account and lead to a number for any of the 100 brands that are on this list. And we've done that for a lot of years now.
14.
Thank you. 14 years. So we really, not only do we have a methodology that works in itself, but we can continuously calibrate, and we do year after year. So the list of this year, the top 10 of the list of this year, is shown here on the screen. And the most significant part, the most significant, let's say, factoid from this page is that for the first time ever, since we've done this study, there are 2 brands out there that have a value of more than $100 billion. What's interesting to me is that those 2 are brands that are, let's say, selling products that are not that incredibly expensive for consumers, or they're not selling products at all like Google. But they are brands that are so pervasive and that are so present in our lives that the amount of money that those companies can make of their presence, of their authenticity and relevance with consumers these days is just ginormous. And these 2 companies have climbed this list at a very high speed. Talking about climbers of the list, these are the top 5 risers in the list of this year, right? Facebook rising a staggering 86% in brand value, up to place 29. And as you see, 3 of the top risers here are automotive companies. The automotive industry is spending a lot of resource and a lot of brain power and a lot of money in reinventing itself to make sure that they continue to be relevant for the generations ahead. And they are doing that in ways, not for every brand, but for many, that we think is generating a lot of value for their companies. New entrants on the list. Most notably, for the first time, there is a Chinese brand on this list. And it's the first of many more to come. And I will say with a little pride that the country on this list that is about the size of Rhode Island, the Netherlands, has 3 brands on the list. That happens to be the country I'm from originally. But if you break this list down by country, clearly the United States is the dominant, let's say, motherland of these global brands. China is now represented with 1 brand on the list that is going to be more going forward for sure. However, having said that, as long as Chinese brands are successful in diversifying their business outside of China, right, Sean?
Right.
Right. So, because as long as they are extremely effective and successful within China, that is absolutely great for them, but they don't qualify from the list if you remember that list of criteria that I showed up front.
The way we view the world, we basically have seen or see 4 ages of branding. The age of identity, the age of value, the age of experience, which is the age we live in right now, and what we see emerging through the lens of technology is the age of you. So just briefly to touch on the earlier ages, the first one being the age of identity. It was really born post the Industrial Revolution when manufacturing achieved scale. So with scale came choice. In this age, what became really, really important was differentiation and identification, right? So how do I recognize the toothpaste that I want on the shelf? And it gave rise to this concept of what we would call branding. And in this age, how we measured things was really just about awareness, right? So if you were the chief marketing officer of Coca-Cola, you just had to worry about if I could measure awareness in terms of how many eyeballs are on my brand, then that was something that would be a success as long as the awareness was going up. What we like to say is that brand, the function and the organizational role inside most corporations was that brand was really an extension of the marketing department. Right? They're the only people who worried about it, and we had CMOs sitting inside of organizations, and they really kind of had like one job in the early days, and it was this job. It was creating and managing identity. So that was the job of most marketers inside of large enterprises in the first stage that we call the age of identity.
A business value captured in those brands. And where marketers and brand people were, if you want, very, very focused on and fighting for a seat at the table. Seriously, as a value driver, the brand leader needed to be heard and his or her perspective.
Some brands are still here, and you know, not everyone has retooled their organizational structure to put brand at the heart of it, but most successful brands today have expanded their purview of brand. It's actually just integrated itself into our lives in a way that we don't even realize. And they nail experience every single time. It's an interesting year, right? So this is all happening for 5 years where it's become scale, the age of experience. But it started with the rise of Google, which is, I like to remind people, only about 10 years old. And there was this whole world that existed pre-Google. So we're already seeing disruption in supply chain now with people like Warby Parker, and that will continue to happen at a scale that is probably something we can't even imagine. Graduating, I don't know whether you're graduating this year or next year, your job just got even more complicated. So to manage identity, you need to know how to measure it, and you need to know how to manage its value. And you also now need to know how to integrate seamless experiences. Because as a consumer, I'm not willing, or I don't have what we would call your job if you're graduating this year. Now, Stef's going to take us to the age that we see emerging. And your
the days that brands could get away with a situation wherein they came together only in 2 places. One place being the CEO of the company, and the other place being with their customer. And those days are over. If you want to deliver against the needs that Chris just describes, even of today's consumer, let alone of tomorrow's consumer, you've got to find a new way of working, you've got to find a new way of organizing that is completely different than the way companies have historically done it. And that has a huge impact for the role of branding, marketing, and design. Think about what we're all doing, right? We're all, well, not all of us, but many, many of us are creating having. And we're putting our story out there, and we're basically asking, we're asking brands and companies to tailor to our needs, to really understand what it is that we want, and deliver on that. And there's, there are companies out there as an icon of what YouTube can mean, and so YouTube is actually using her to get more and more brands interested in working with YouTube and advertising on YouTube.
If I can just add, it's so ironic. In YouTube, one of the pioneers in the digital space did a traditional advertising program promote a star that had just been born online like last year. It was like an incredibly ironic moment in time.
Yeah, in my marketing days it was called They Bought the Stars. If I may say, by far the best looking jury member as well, but it's besides the point. So, in the age of you, it is really all about personalization, and becoming a brand is within reach for each and every one of us. That is not something anymore that excuses for that anymore. If you want to become a brand, if you want to have 7 million followers, come up with a good idea, and just do it, because anybody can, as long as you've got good ideas. The audience is there, the platforms are there, the technology to reach 2 billion people is actually there. So just go out and do it. Now, not all of us want to become Bethany's, but all of us want to be served by the brands in our life, with the things that we want when we want them, right? So personalization is going to really get a new meaning. Instead of Coca-Cola, printing labels with different names as a more or less like as a promotional item, I want my Coca-Cola probably slightly different than Chris wants it. So I just want my Stef Coca-Cola. That's it. If I'm driving my car, I actually, would like somebody to encourage me to motor on if I'm just coming out of traffic, right? Why not? So where this is going, we don't exactly know, because we can't predict the future. But there are absolutely evident drivers, and there are evident shifts in society, and therefore shifts in the role of brands that point in the direction of increasing personalization, increasing tailoring, and for companies to adjust in ways of working, in ways of thinking, and in ways of, let's say, thinking about what the core capabilities are. Major changes versus what companies used to do. And to Chris's point, design is let's say at least one of the very few languages that you can use to bring all those different experiences together. So where is this going? Again, we don't really know, but what we do know is that we're heading towards an age of roughly 7 billion brands, as many brands as there are people in the world. While two-way transparency will move to full transparency, where everything is connected with everything, and everybody is connected with everybody. Where work and personal lives will completely converge. So where there's no walls anymore between work time and out of work time, where things blend into each other at least as much as you want. And if you don't set boundaries, there will be no boundaries. Where the distinction between B2B and B2C will disappear. The business to business and business consumer, it's the exact same thing. And B2B and B2C are actually an artificial distinction today already, versus say 5 to 10 years ago. Data liquidity will be as important to global markets as capital liquidity, right? It's really about the free flow of data that will either enable or discourage economic growth as much as capital has done over the past decades. And companies will replace states as infrastructure providers. Chris can actually really talk about this last point.
Yes. Yeah, so we are working with a private company right now where this is now beginning to happen, where energy, manufacturing, things that may at one time have been controlled by governments are now being handed over to corporations who, quite frankly, can do it better than any government could have done it anyhow. And as technology, again, permeates every aspect of our lives, including government, including infrastructure, when there are sensors everywhere, including in my clothing in this room, that whole concept of government will begin to shift. So we know, just on a little bit of futurism, that MIT right now is working on the liberation of the pixel. So right now we're all walking around like zombies right on the street, staring at this thing in our hand, stepping into traffic, bumping into people. And what they're working on right now is getting the device, or getting the pixel off the device. So I sat in this room, this presentation this summer with someone from MIT who said to the audience, he goes, look at all this space in here. It's all just empty volume. What if we could take the pixel off of our screen and put it in air so that every single pixel, you have to think of it, would have a GPS assigned to it. So it could position itself in space. Is the next leap in technology that will see us, the screen disappear and anything will become a screen. So that's kind of what's coming next in sooner than you might think, I guess.
Yep. And I actually, last month, I got my first utility bill that was really empowering me with data, because it said, hey, this is what you used over the past 12 months. This is what your average neighbors did. This is what your best neighbor did. This is what your worst neighbor did. This is where you are. You got 4 kids. So, this is where you should be, this and that. And I like that. I'm sure there are some people out there that get freaked out by that, but I like that because I feel empowered to do something now. Whether it's using more or less energy, that's up to me. So back to this building slide of the role of the marketer, right? The role used to be about creating and managing the identity of a brand. And quickly that was followed by doing a lot of that work and measuring and managing the value of your brand. And after a decade or so, the role to integrate seamless experiences for clients became an additional role. So it's not that any of these previous roles went away. It's just that the role became bigger, more complicated, and more demanding. And going forward, it's really about making business personal. And I like to add the word again to that, because that's, of course, where business and specifically branding started in the first place. Branding started with, I know this guy, his name is Chris, and he makes a pretty mean margarita. And I know where he lives. And if I want to drink a margarita, I go to Chris, right? And Chris would come to Stef because, Tacos, right? There we go. So, and we were our brand, right? We were running our own little proposition, and we were the brands ourselves. In a way, we're going back to that. Enabled by the digital age, enabled by technology, enabled by the complete globalization and fluidity and liquidity of data, money, all of that enables us to go back to where we came from, and that is for business to really become personal again, which I think is major progress. So to sum it up,
a
Chris.
Closing thought. This is a quote from someone at Intel Labs this year, but I think it's a pretty profound quote. And I know you guys spent the day thinking about authenticity, so I'm going to read it to you. It says, we are reinventing a lot of ideas around security, privacy, safety, love, marriage, kids, God, violence, the nation state, power, justice, money. Everything is up for grabs. So as you think about authenticity moving forward, you need to think of it contextually. And what does authenticity mean in an age where our values are shifting rapidly? Right? So which side? Will there be a digital divide? Will there be the power up versus the power nots? What will happen? I think it's a fascinating age. Our CEO of North America likes to describe the age as if 100 years ago you looked out your window, you might actually see at the same time on your street horses with a carriage behind it and an automobile, right, at the same time. And it's a nice metaphor for the age that we're living in right now, where technology is transforming fundamentally everything that we do in every aspect of our lives, and at a time when we're re-examining traditional values. I just heard this morning on the news that the Catholic Church is re-examining its view on gay marriage, right? It's like, well,
I'm sorry.
give props to the Pope. But it's just like an interesting age that we live in, right? Something that was so valued and sacrosanct is suddenly like, well, you know what? Maybe there's another way of looking at it. And so it's fascinating area, or it's fascinating age to live in. And I do think what is authentic now needs to be examined through this new lens of shifting values. With that, we're going to have some questions. First of all, does anyone on the floor have any questions?
First of all, I wanted to thank Chris and Stef for coming in from New York. Not sure how my face got up there, but apparently it's up there. So if anybody doesn't have any questions, I do have one. I thought it was curious. Oh, we got a hand? Oh, yeah. Matt, go ahead. Sure. Would you like the mic?
I think I can project. I may have missed it. Did you have a point of view on the role of brand in the organization for the age of you versus the age of experience? I think you're moving brand to the center of the organization. Maybe I missed it, but I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I'll answer. It's like, no, we do not have that illustration yet because we don't quite know how things are going to shake out. I do think that the illustration or the framework of the organization assembling around the customer is correct. Again, I think you have to go back to the disruption of the supply chain and how, again, if I want, a clicker in hot pink and I want it tomorrow, it's like, and I want it with custom parts on the inside because I really love clickers for some strange reason, then I should be able to reassemble. The supply chain should adjust to me and how I want my clicker delivered to me. And I just think we're at the beginning of that happening. GE is making some inroads in terms of being not only a what you would call a manufacturer and a hard goods manufacturing company, but also in addition a software company, and they're beginning to examine that. I think once we get sensors everywhere and they start measuring it, the promise will come true.
I think if I look at the role of the marketeer, right? So then in most companies today, the role of the CMO is primarily that of the person who makes sure that, let's say, the end consumer has a seat at the table. So a representative of the end consumer when big strategic decisions are made. Big or small strategic decisions are made by the company. Going forward, I look at the CMO as somebody who is responsible for that integration machine for the around the customer experience. So it is really the person who is responsible for the customer integration machine. That's how I like to talk about it. And that means that becomes a very different function, because if you listen to what Chris just says, that has more to do with manufacturing flexibility and response to the interface between customer service, let's say the online sales and manufacturing, with innovation as a function somewhere in there. Then it has to do with the traditional things that marketers do. So I see a future where CMO roles are not necessarily held by what we would typically think as as people qualified for marketing roles, right? I see them as the most important driver of value for the company, or representing the most important value drivers for the company. And I see people from many different backgrounds in those type of roles. I said earlier, finally marketing has become way too important to be left to the marketeers. I Thankfully, that is the case now in most companies, but that trend will continue. More and more CEOs will realize that everything they do is their brand. Just like in the days where I was running my, what was it, margaritas or taco? I ran my tacos business. You know, everything I did, or my kids did for that matter, was my brand. And if my kids was bothering other kids at school, I was selling less tacos. So, you know, I better get that all in check. And I better make sure that you know, we behave with a set of values and in a way that is motivating for people to buy my tacos. So it's the function marketing is going to change dramatically. And I think you already see that in a company as Amazon, where that function is really much more of a hybrid function than a department, for example. Does that answer your question?
I think also there was a stat published this year that in 2015, the CMO in most organizations is expected to spend more on technology than the chief technology officer inside an organization. So it's become that crucial to how we reach customers now.
If you talk to IBM and you ask them, so where's your future growth coming from? It's the target group, chief marketing officers within companies, more than the CTOs or CIOs.
I have sort of a question, Chris.
Mm.
I'm really struck by the stuff you guys were talking about in terms of the, you know, increasing customization. As you were talking about your pink clicker, this really came to me. As opposed to this identity branding, with the customization, it's much more of a relationship. You're the one that can give me my customized pink clicker. But I sit here thinking, is there some kind of threat to the brand when things get, yes, there's this relationship, but how can I remember who it was who sold me the clicker when it doesn't look like any other, you know, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to note that those ages, although they're put up sequentially, one can't exist without the other. So you can't be a strong experience brand unless you've nailed your identity and you understand how to manage it, right? So they build upon each other, and no one age is less valuable than the other. So I think it's getting more complicated. And again, I think it is the role for design moving forward. Identification will always be part of it, but to me, what's going to become more important is the cohesion idea that I'm having a more connected emotive experience. So when I'm interacting through all of my Apple stuff, it should all feel like Apple. If I'm interacting on Coke or wanting to experience Coke, it should all feel like a Coke experience, which is, again, why authenticity will always be such an important bellwether, if you will, of brands. And it's so easy to get called out now, as you guys spent the whole morning knowing about when you're not authentic. You get called on it straight away now just because of social media. Things go south pretty quickly. And so the more authentic you are, the better you are to weather those ups and downs from a PR point of view.
But to add to that, remember when I talked about brand valuation, one of the components or one of the drivers of valuation is brand, let's say the role of brand, right? So for me personally, for all the categories where the role of brand is not that important, you know, Amazon is the brand because that's where I buy it. Or Walmart for that matter, or whatever. A strong retail brand can easily take the place of the trust mark that I need on all that stuff where a brand doesn't really matter that much. So either you turn your product and with that your brand into something that commands a relatively high role of brand, or you should be absolutely very worried for, you know, the value and relevance of having a branded business in the first place. So, you know, this is my, at least my personal view on that. So and that is, there, you know, a lot of companies are realizing that and are really thinking through, okay, so not only from like a brand perspective, so what is my authenticity, that's crucial, but also how do I make sure that my category as a whole becomes a category where brand really matters for people. Right, Rebecca? Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so, thank you.
This may be a bit of a broad question, but how do you foresee that the age of you is going to impact the average consumer and the way that they shop, from online to in-store? I'm just trying to, knowing that I work a lot in fast-moving consumer goods, how is that going to impact the average consumer?
It's going to be so much better. Right? It's always better in the future. I think it's going to be so much more around having the brands that I want available to me when I want them. So we all know we live in this age where, I don't know, you're at work and you're needing to do research on a company, and then suddenly it's like these useless ads are showing up on my Facebook page, and I'm like, why are these ads here? The technology, for as sophisticated and as awe-inspiring as it is, it's still not nearly perfect enough. As any CMO will tell you, they still can't reach me and my GPS. So I think that it will be a lot better, right? So some of the early tests they're doing for, say, in-aisle shopping right now, so if you still went to a grocery store to buy your groceries, that your phone will have a sensor in it that will highlight, say you have someone in your family who has dietary restrictions and you only want gluten-free stuff. So your phone will send a signal that only the products that have gluten-free, the tag on the strip that holds the products will light up for you. And you're like, oh, this makes it so much easier. So it will get better. It will get more personalized to me and my needs and my interests. It's happening right now. It might even be in market, but it's coming, that test. I've seen it.
Who in the audience has kids? Right? I don't know about you guys, but since I have kids, I have started to look at certain aspects of my life through the eyes of my kids. So every time when I'm getting gas for my car, for example, I have like this outer body experience, and I'm thinking, Jesus, this is ridiculous what I'm doing here. Why am I doing this? My kids will laugh in 20 years. When I try to explain to them that every now and then I have to stop somewhere and get something called gas in my car, and how sad is that, right?